ワンくん、起きなさい。
Huh? What? Oh. Hello. First of all, I'm sorry this video is so dreadfully late. I usually try to get my new Vocaloid release videos out within 1 or 2 months of the release, but this particular one was special to me, as I'm sure most of you could have guessed. This video is probably going to be the longest video I ever do on a single Vocaloid release, and it's not just because Luka is my favorite Vocaloid. There was just so much to research and talk about. I've spent more time on this video than I have on any previous one, and I hope that it shows and that you enjoy it. Because it's so long, I'll put an annotation in the bottom right corner so you can skip to my closing statement and the songs if you just want to hear some tunes. So with that, let's check out today's episode. Krypton Future Media gave Miku fanatics a pretty sweet treat with the release of Miku Append in April of 2010. Aside from Rin and Len Act 2, Miku Append was the first time a Vocaloid received new voice banks, and Miku Append's package came with 6 new voice banks for one low price. After the success of Miku Append and the Kagamine Appends, other Vocaloid companies saw the potential in creating additional voice banks for their own Vocaloids, and today it's not uncommon for a Vocaloid to have 2 or more voice banks. But Krypton's Vocaloids continue to lead the pack in both number and variety of additional voice banks. Rin and Len each received 3 additional voice banks, and Kaito and Meiko V3's packages contained 4 and 5 voice banks respectively. In 2013, Miku's V3 packages were released, bringing Miku's total number of voice banks to an astounding 15. But what about Luka? Megurine Luka was released January 30th, 2009, and for me, it was love at first sight and love at first sound. Of course, back then, the only Vocaloids I really knew about were Miku and Rin. Oh, and you too, Len. But as many wonderful Vocaloids we've had released since Luka, she's remained my favorite all these years. I didn't necessarily think Luka had the absolute best voice bank. Luka was part of Krypton's CV series after all, so even Gumi, who was released 6 months later, had an appreciably more realistic sounding voice bank. And of course V3 Vocaloids were capable of being much smoother with their triphone samples. But I'm not alone in my adoration of our pink-haired angel. Luka's voice was a siren song that captured our hearts, and to this day it has remained uniquely Luka. It would be no understatement to say that Luka's Append was highly anticipated, and we were all looking forward to it after the Kagamine Appends were released in the December of 2010. Shortly before the Kagamine Appends were released, Sasaki Wataru, known as Watt, Krypton's lead Vocaloid developer, tweeted that Luka's Append was in its alpha testing stage in December of 2010. He also said that at that point in time, Meiko's update was a bit further along in development than Luka's, which was ahead of Kaito's planned update. This was almost a year before the Vocaloid 3 engine was released, so the updates he was working on used the Vocaloid 2 engine. A beta version of V2 Luka Append was used in 2 pieces of commercial music in late 2011 and January 2012. I'll link to the songs in the video description, though from that point on Krypton moved all of their projects to the V3 engine. Through 2012 and 2013, Watt made occasional mentions of Luka's development, with perhaps the most notable bit of information being that Krypton created a custom recording script for Luka's Japanese voice banks, different from Yamaha's standard recording script. In early 2014, Watt was working on Luka V3 as well as Rin and Len V3 at the same time, alternating their development every week or 2. By Luka's 5th anniversary, January 2014, Krypton set up a temporary page for Luka V3, promising more information was to come soon. That summer, work on Luka was beginning to pick up, with Watt testing some new recording methods for new voice banks. He also mentioned that Krypton hired some American sound engineers to help with the development of Luka's V3 English voice bank. Luka's V2 English voice bank was a novelty at the time of her release, and it gave her a marketing hook, but it was developed strictly with Japanese users in mind. Krypton wanted to improve Luka's English capability, so Luka's voice provider received some coaching from some native English speakers, and they checked over the recordings to make sure they sounded correct. The first time one of Luka's V3 voice banks was demonstrated was at Miku Expo 2014, held in New York City. Shown on October 9th, the video featured a silhouette of Luka's V3 design, and the song was an English cover of Just Be Friends, with the lyrics translation done by Vocaloids, a popular YouTube singer. Following the demo, Watt told us that he would be able to go into detail about why Luka was taking so long the following month, while hinting that Luka worked very well with a mysterious new function. This would later be revealed to be the AtH system, which I will discuss in detail soon. Watt also bemoaned the append selection process. They had recorded so many new voice banks for Luka that he couldn't include them all in her V3 package, so he spent a lot of time choosing which appends to keep and which to drop, to prevent the package's costs from going too high. His goal was to include a total of 9 appends with Luka V3. But November 20th was the day that took us all by surprise, with the announcement of the Vocaloid 4 engine. During the announcement, Luka's new character design was revealed, as well as the fact that Luka's update would be releasing for the new engine. They then played a demonstration of Luka's V4 Japanese voice banks. Luka V4's release date was set for late February of 2015, which felt like an eternity away. She would ultimately miss that date due to the complexity of her new features, but finally, our goddess descended upon us on March 19th with the name Megurine Luka V4X. The X in her product name stands for Expression and Extended, which refers to the AtH system introduced with Luka V4, and it makes explaining Luka's available voice banks a little complicated. Before I talk about how the AtH system works though, I need to address the elephant in the room. Why would you put an elephant in a room? A couple weeks before Luka V4 went on sale, her 14-day trial version was released, which allows you to test her primary Japanese voice bank, Luka Hard, with full AtH functionality. In some English-speaking Vocaloid communities, the reaction to the trial voice bank was very strong to say the least, and not exactly positive. There will always be people who overly criticize things, but even if you ignored the most critical comments, there was an almost universal sense of disappointment. Part of the reason this video is so late is that seeing all of the negative reactions to the trial and release upset me, honestly. Not because people were saying Luka V4 was bad, but because I was worried that they were right. I could see their points and understand why they felt the way they did for the most part. But the complaints weren't just about the trial voice bank, they reflected concerns about the entire way Luka's update had been developed and presented after the V3 era began. Perhaps in a parallel dimension, Luka Append was Krypton's first Vocaloid 3 product. For us, it was Kaito V3, followed by Miku V3 and Meiko V3. I understood why Luka's update was pushed behind those Vocaloids, and it honestly didn't bother me. Kaito and Meiko needed updating more than Luka did, and Miku V3 didn't release until nearly 2 years after the Vocaloid 3 engine had launched, so it's not like she was rushed just to upgrade to the new engine. If anything, the V3 Krypton releases got me even more excited for Luka, because I thought they were all very well done, and I couldn't wait to see how Luka would perform given similar treatment. But through 2012 and the first half of 2013, we heard nothing on Luka's development besides a mention in a tweet or two. I think in May of 2012, Watt confirmed that Luka would be receiving an updated English voice bank, but that was about it. It wasn't until close to Meiko V3's release that we heard that Luka was being developed in earnest. And I believe that it was around this time that the focus of Luka's development shifted radically. This was also when Watt began referring to Luka's update as New Type Luka rather than Luka Append or Luka V3, which implies to me that this is when the AtH system began to affect Luka's development. Luka V4X has 4 voice banks, technically 6 installable. 2 Japanese voice banks, hard and soft, both with AtH functionality, as well as space-saving non-AtH versions of each. There are also 2 English voice banks, but the AtH system only works with Japanese voice banks, so we'll come back to them later. AtH stands for Enhanced Voice Expression Control, and in concept it sounds great. While the Vocaloid editor can make use of multiple voice banks and Vocaloids at the same time, you can only set one singer for a given musical part per track. If you want to switch to a different voice bank for a certain note or word, you have to create a new track with the second voice bank and put the notes on that track. This is fine for duets or pieces where each voice bank has long parts, but if you want to add emphasis to a specific note in the middle of a word, or you find one append voice bank is more effective at pronouncing a certain word than the one you're currently using, you'd have to make a new track just for those notes. AtH is supposed to change that by allowing you to give phonemes voice colors, which will change how they sound in a certain way. Adding a whisper color to a note will make it sound like it's coming from a whisper voice bank, and adding a power note will make it sound like it's coming from a power voice bank, and so on. All of this could be done on a single track, and you could add voice colors to multiple notes at a time, even the whole musical piece, if you wanted to. Luka's AtH system has 9 different voice colors available, from whisper and soft to cute and husky. That sounds incredible, like Luka has 20 different voice banks, since AtH works with both her hard and soft Japanese voice banks. But after the trial was released, people complained that many of the voice colors are not only too similar to Luka's hard voice bank, they are too similar to each other, which makes the whole system moot. Many of the complaints surrounding Luka's release were about AtH, not just the system itself, but how it seemed that Krypton spent more time and effort promoting it than Luka herself. Yes, promotional material about AtH always mentioned Luka, and it featured her character design after it was revealed, but there were several blog posts and interviews given about AtH's functions, yet Luka herself and the quality of her standard voice banks was given very little attention. Now you could say that AtH and Luka are inseparable, so she didn't need to be mentioned specifically, but that may have been part of the problem. Krypton wasn't promoting Luka, she was merely the vehicle to promote the new feature. Also, consider this. Kaito had over 20 demo songs to show off his V3 package, and Meiko V3 had 16. Miku V3 received 9 demos if you include the 5 made for Miku V3 English. Not as many as the others, but all of her V2 voice banks were updated and people already had an idea of what they would sound like. Luka V4, on the other hand, only received 4 demos, 5 if you include the songs shown during the November Vocaloid 4 announcement, and they're not even full-length songs. That's only 5 short songs to show off Luka's 4 voice banks, 9 voice colors per Japanese voice bank, cross-synthesis, and growl, all of which are completely new. The word insufficient is itself insufficient to describe how few demos she was given compared to how many she needed to properly showcase her capabilities. Why were there so few demos? Well, if you give out a voice bank to let producers make demo songs, you always run the risk of the voice bank being leaked. So that was a justifiable concern on Krypton's part, especially since the AtH system's novelty would encourage people to leak it. But many demos for Vocaloids are created by producers with other voice banks. The company itself, Krypton in this case, requests VSQs, and when it gets them, it switches the singers for whatever voice bank it's marketing at the time. This process for demo selection has its issues, but in Luka's case, the worst was the bottleneck problem. The Vocaloid development team at Krypton is perhaps not as large as it should be, and because Yamaha sprang the Vocaloid 4 announcement out of nowhere in November, Vocaloid companies had to scramble to take advantage of its capabilities. Luka was still having growl samples recorded in December of 2014, just 2 months before she was supposed to go on sale at that point. Releasing Luka as a V3 after Krypton was made aware of Vocaloid 4 was simply out of the question, and with all of the EVEC voice data, her Japanese and English voice banks, making them all work with cross-synthesis and growl, not to mention developing PA Pro Studio 2.0 to work with all of these things, there just wasn't enough time to do it all. As a result, Luka V4 was rushed. Maybe not Rin and Len Act 1 rushed, but rushed nonetheless. But a rushed product doesn't necessarily mean a terrible product. Miku's initial V2 release was famous for being rushed, and while it had its issues, it was still more than good enough to kickstart Vocaloid's popularity. But the complaints about Luka V4 weren't limited to EVEC and her lack of demos. People also criticized her Japanese voice banks, especially the hard voice bank, for many different reasons. First and foremost, out of the box at default settings, Luka V4 doesn't sound much at all like Luka V2. It's still Luka, and she still has that certain quality to her, but you have to dig a little to find it. Back in the Vocaloid 2 era, Krypton's CV series voice banks were voice acted, rather than being their provider's natural singing voices. But for Miku V3 and Luka V4, it seems that Krypton chose to make their voices more natural sounding. Miku's V3 original voice bank is wonderful, but it does sound fairly different from Miku's first V2 voice bank. Miss Asakawa Yu, Luka's beautiful and adorable voice provider, tweeted several times that Luka's V4 sounds to her like her real singing voice. Apart from that, some folks complained that the hard voice bank sounded choppy, raspy, that it had audio distortions, and that it was difficult to use. I myself experienced the seemingly choppy side of her voice bank, especially when I compared it to Yukari V4's voice banks, which seemed smoother and easier to work with for a newbie like myself. To many, the voice bank didn't perform well when plugged into existing VSQs without adjustments, which they consider to be a sign of poor quality and unnecessary difficulty. There's also the English soft voice bank. Luka V4 is the first Vocaloid release to offer more than one English voice bank. She has an English straight voice bank and an English soft voice bank. This should be a momentous occasion, especially since they can be used with cross-synthesis, but in my opinion it doesn't really count. The English soft voice bank is exactly the same as the straight voice bank, except a little quieter and rougher. It was not made from different vocal recordings, and you can replicate it yourself fairly easily using the breathiness parameter on the straight voice bank. So, with EVEC troubles, a change in tone, an unwieldy voice bank, a lack of promotion, a lackluster English append, and everything else I've said up to this point in mind, some people were very disappointed with Luka V4. One person was so distraught he boldly declared, "Luka V4X is the worst Vocaloid ever made." Is she? Is she really the worst Vocaloid ever? Well, if I'm being perfectly honest, no! Are you kidding me? Of course she isn't, not even close. But I took all of this time to explain the issues with Luka V4 to help you understand why some people, especially Luka fans, were so disappointed and had such poor to lukewarm reactions to her release. But I'm done being negative. The majority of the complaints surrounding her voice banks and EVEC were initial reactions, and while there are still people who think her V4 release did Luka a disservice, most people change their opinions the more they practice with her. Luka V4 does not behave the way most Vocaloids do, so things that worked with other Vocaloids may not work for her. You basically have to learn how to use Vocaloid all over again, and that frustrated a lot of people in the beginning. But the more they used her, the more potential they saw in AtH, and the better she performed. Luka V4 is certainly not a Vocaloid for beginners, and if you choose to use her voice banks without taking advantage of AtH, you're definitely at a disadvantage. Rather than being an optional addition, AtH is fairly important to making Luka V4 sound as good as she can, and while I wouldn't argue if you said that counted as a strike against her, it puts her on a level of her own in terms of potential and versatility. From this point on, we're going to be talking about the things that make Luka V4X so different and so great. Let's rewind a bit and go over her Japanese voice banks again. Now, Luka's V4 Hard voice bank was the one that was released as a trial version, and people expected that this was Luka's power voice bank. And you could hardly blame them, as this voice bank was called Luka V3 Power before the names were finalized. But the Hard voice bank isn't an outright power voice bank in the vein of Ritsukide or Meiji's Hunter voice bank. And it's a shame because many people were expecting and hoping for a strong, powerful voice bank for Luka's update. There were also people disappointed that the Hard voice bank sounded so different than her V2 voice bank, as I said before. I think a lot of this confusion was a problem of semantics and, to a degree, a misunderstanding of Krypton's intentions with Luka. When Watt was developing Luka's original V2 voice banks, he wanted Luka to have a quote-unquote sexy quality. But he wasn't able to make it work well with the Vocaloid 2 engine. Because Watt couldn't achieve the ideal voice he had in mind, Luka ended up with his Plan B, which was the mature, husky female voice we know and love. He tried to go for sexy again with Luka's V3 voice banks, and he wasn't quite satisfied with those results either. But what does making her sound sexy even mean? I think what Watt was going for was for her to sound fairly aspirated or breathy, kind of the way Yukari's voice bank is, but without sacrificing as much stability as Yukari does. I think part of the change in Luka V4's tone comes from Watt trying to make her sound a little more like he originally intended. And this ties in with the lack of power that some people complained about in Luka V4. Yes, many people have used Luka in hard rock and metal songs over the years, and she worked very well in them. But you have to remember that Luka was created for jazz and lounge music. Many people, including Watt, consider Luka's voice to be a soft vocal, not exactly compatible with a strong power voice bank like Meiko V3's power voice bank. She was supposed to be sultry and seductive, and while she may or may not have hit that mark in her V2 release, she still wasn't meant to occupy the same space as Flower was obviously meant to. I have heard people say that Luka's V4 soft voice bank sounds a little more like her V2 voice bank in tone, so it is possible that the soft voice bank is what we might consider to be the updated version of Luka's V2 voice bank. The hard voice bank would therefore be a slightly stronger voice bank created to indulge those of us who enjoyed Luka's voice bank in vocal rock and metal songs. That is, if my theory is correct. Regardless, I agree that a stronger power voice bank would have been nice, but her hard voice bank isn't as weak as some people have claimed. Of course, if we want Luka Hard to sound more powerful, we can always use the AtH system, right? Now we've come to the meat of the Luka V4X release, the Enhanced Voice Expression Control System. It was announced alongside Luka's reveal in the Vocaloid 4 announcement livestream, and while Krypton made blog posts explaining the concept to us, we really had to wait until Luka's trial to experience it for ourselves. It is unlike anything else in Vocaloid, which led to some frustration among people trying it for the first time, and maybe even the third time. But if you stick with it, you'll find it an extremely useful tool. The core of AtH is of course the voice colors, and there are 9 to choose from: Whisper, Soft, Husky, Native, Power 1, Power 2, Cute, Dark, and Falsetto. That is in addition to the default sounds of the Japanese hard and soft voice banks. As I said before, AtH is exclusive to the Japanese voice banks. So how do you use AtH? Here I have opened up a VSQ of one of Luka's V2 demo songs, Afternoon Sunshine, with her V4 hard voice bank. Pro Studio 2 has a nice GUI you can use to access the AtH functions. For voice colors, when you hover over a phoneme, you'll see a little blank square on its top left corner. If you don't see it, make sure you have one of the AtH voice banks selected, obviously, and make sure that this button in the top right corner is colored in. Double-clicking this square, or right-clicking a phoneme and clicking Set AtH, will open the AtH Properties window. On the left you can see the voice colors, and clicking one will apply that color to any phonemes you have selected. Most of the voice color names are self-explanatory. Whisper sounds like a whisper voice bank, Soft sounds softer, Husky makes her voice rougher, Power 1 and Power 2 add some oomph to varying degrees, and Falsetto is designed to strengthen her high notes. The native voice color is described as sounding more like Luka V2. Cute is supposed to sound cuter, and the dark voice color is sung with a quote-unquote closed mouth. When people first tried using AtH, they found the voice colors to be very underwhelming because they didn't sound too different from the hard voice bank. But Luka V4's standard output volume is pretty low, so you really need to turn up your computer's volume to get a good listen. And when you do, you'll find that they do sound distinct. Here is a demonstration of the hard voice bank and all of the voice colors using Afternoon Sunshine, with the dynamics and brightness parameter changes turned off.
このまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へ
What the heck happened with falsetto? Well, the falsetto voice color obviously wasn't made for lower notes. So let's try that again, but with the song shifted up 1 octave.
このまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へ
Much better. Even though I turned up the volume, it was probably difficult to hear a huge difference between all of the colors, but I assure you they're there. So this system is what replaces traditional append voice banks in Luka V4, and that definitely disconcerted those of us who were expecting Luka's update to be straightforward. If all you ever wanted from a Luka update was to load up a Luka Power voice bank and go to town, AtH will have its hands full winning you over. But I believe that for most of you, it will in the end. While you can set every note in a song to the same voice color very easily, to emulate a complete append voice bank, that's not how you're expected to use AtH. In fact, in some cases, it's impossible to do this, as AtH won't work on notes that are too short. It will just play the phoneme using whichever bass voice bank you're currently using, hard or soft. So you'll set most of the notes to the predominant voice color you want for the song, but you're supposed to experiment with the other voice colors on specific notes, in the interest of greater realism. A human singing voice can switch from one quality to many others throughout the length of a song, even within a single word, and that's what the AtH system allows you to emulate fairly easily. The downside is that it takes up a lot of time, and it gives you so many options that it's a little overwhelming. But even if you're not crazy about the idea of voice colors just yet, the AtH system offers two additional features that may entice you. The first is called voice release, and it allows you to set two different kinds of breaths at the end of phonemes. One is short and one is long. They allow phonemes to end a bit more gradually. It's much subtler than some of the voice colors, but it can be combined with all of the voice colors to provide slightly different results.
このまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へ
The final AtH function is known as consonant extension. Setting it on a phoneme will make it layer or repeat the same consonant sound twice, 3 times, or 4 times, reinforcing the consonant sound. This is useful if a particular note is not making the consonant sound strongly enough and therefore doesn't sound right. Of course, consonant extension can only be used on phonemes that start with consonant sounds. It's also not a function you're meant to use on multiple short notes in succession, as your Vocaloid will start to sound like a machine gun.
このまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へこのまま夢の世界へ
All of these features also work on the Japanese soft voice bank, of course. Though some of the voice colors sound the same in both voice banks, others do sound different. I doubt that Watt actually recorded different AtH voice banks for hard and soft. That would have required recording each AtH voice bank twice, which would make for 18 voice banks total, plus 2 for hard and soft themselves, which is just way too many. And there were AtH voice banks that were created but ultimately not included in the Luka V4 release. There was a Power 3 voice bank and a double voice bank and possibly more that were dropped for whatever reason. So I think that the AtH voice banks were recorded for the hard voice bank, since that is Luka V4's default voice bank, and the soft versions were edited in software. So some of them are hard to distinguish between the hard and soft versions, but others are readily apparent. If you're listening closely, anyhow. While people debated hotly over AtH and the Japanese voice banks, Luka's English straight voice bank received mostly praise. It is, without a doubt, the best English voice bank Krypton has developed so far. If you were critical of Kaito, Meiko, or Miku's English voice banks, then that may not mean much to you, and I don't have a Western-developed English Vocaloid to compare her to. But I saw very few complaints about Luka's English straight voice bank, from the reception of her English demos to the tests people performed after her release. Her R phoneme is similar to Krypton's other English Rs, which isn't great, but it's improved in almost every other way. Like Luka's Japanese V4 voice banks, her V4 straight voice bank doesn't match the sound of her original V2 English voice bank, and one quality missing from Luka V4 is matching vocal ranges for her two languages. Luka's V2 voice banks, Japanese and English, both shared a vocal range of D3 to D5, and a tempo range of 65 to 145 beats per minute. Of course, the goal for Luka's update was to expand her capabilities, and it makes sense that her voice provider would have an easier time with Japanese than English. All 4 of Luka V4's voice banks do share the same tempo range, 50 to 170 beats per minute, which is a somewhat larger range than her V2's. Curiously though, while Luka V4's Japanese voice bank share a similar size vocal range to her V2 voice bank, just shifted to a lower octave, her English 4 voice banks have smaller vocal ranges. Vocal and tempo ranges for Vocaloid releases have always been suggestions and recommendations, however, and what was considered optimal in the Vocaloid 2 era may be treated differently today. These differences may simply be the result of changing standards rather than changes in voice bank development. I have heard complaints that Luka's higher range isn't as good as it used to be though, so I could be wrong. While I wouldn't recommend Luka V4 as your first Vocaloid due to her complexity, if you purchase her as your first V4 Vocaloid, then you don't necessarily need to buy the Vocaloid 4 editor. Like the V3 Krypton products, Luka V4 comes with Pixiv Studio, Krypton's own Vocaloid editor, only now it has been updated to version 2.0 to add support for EVAC and Vocaloid 4's new functions. When it was introduced with Kaito V3, Pixiv Studio was only compatible with Krypton's V3 releases, but it has since been updated to work with all V3 and V4 Vocaloids. V2s will work after you use the V2 to V3 library import tool. Version 2.0 of Pixiv Studio will also enable cross-synthesis for Kaito V3, Meiko V3, and Miku V3's voice banks, so if you already own one of their packages, Luka V4 will give them more capabilities. I'm not experienced enough to be able to give a detailed comparison of Pixiv Studio and the V4 editor, but I can tell you that they both have their pros and cons. The V4 editor is a standalone program that has more options to play with, and it has more plugin support. You can even write your own plugins for it in LUA, though don't ask me how to do that. Quick side note, for those of you who just don't like Pixiv Studio or can't get it to work for whatever reason, someone made an unofficial job plugin for the V4 editor that allows you to apply EVAC functions so that you don't have to edit the phonemes to add them manually. It's not perfect, but it's much nicer than doing it by hand. I'll include a link to it in the video description. As for Pixiv Studio, it's much slicker than the V4 editor. It's easier to add and remove tracks and change singers, pitch and falsetto rendering updates automatically, and the phoneme preview system is pretty sweet. If you click a phoneme, a preview will play based on its key in the piano roll. It will also play this preview if you move the note up and down the roll.
Ma, ma, no, ko, ma, 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 ma.
Unfortunately, this preview does not currently account for voice colors or parameter changes, so it's not nearly as useful as it could be. But it's still a lot nicer than the V4 editor, which doesn't do any previewing except for whatever default phoneme you set in the options menu. Pixiv Studio also has all of its elements in one window, so you don't have to worry about windows being hidden whenever you bring something up like the mixer. But Pixiv won't let you import WAV files, since it's designed to be used from within a digital audio workstation application. So if you want to create a cover song, for example, you're probably better off working in the V4 editor since it's all self-contained in the editor. Additionally, Pixiv is much better at manipulating Vocaloid parameters like brightness and pitch bend. You can easily access up to 3 of the parameters, and double-clicking on one will quickly enlarge or shrink its window. As for the V4 editor, its parameter editor will disappoint you if you've used the V3 editor as the parameters have been moved to drop-down menus. I assume this was done because Yamaha might have felt that displaying all of them at once was becoming too cumbersome. But I've seen multiple people complain about the change, so keep it in mind if you're a V3 user. Because Pixiv Studio is a virtual instrument plugin, it is not a standalone application and must be opened from within a DAW. That means if you try to use Luka V4's trial and you don't have a compatible DAW or the V4 editor, you can't use the trial, unfortunately. But if you purchase any of Krypton's V3 or V4 products, you get a free serial key for the DAW that works best with PA Pro Studio, called Studio One. And once you register the serial at the PreSonus site, you get access to a bunch of free digital instruments too. If you buy Luka V4X from SonicWire or Big Fish Audio, you should have access to English installation instructions in a PDF of some sort. But if you need help, you can watch my Luka V4X unboxing video. The only thing I don't cover is how to activate voice banks using PA Pro Studio, as I already had the V4 editor from my Yukari V4 unboxing, and I wasn't thinking ahead enough. I wanted Luka's physical box as soon as possible because, well, fanboy, so I pre-ordered her from Krypton using a forwarding service. If you are considering purchasing her physical box now or in the future, you can avoid a forwarding service by ordering from Big Fish Audio. They ship via FedEx, and according to their shipping guide, it seems they'll ship to just about anywhere, as long as you have a PayPal account or a major credit card. Of course, they also sell digital copies if you want to forego shipping fees and delays. Luka V4X retails for $170 US, plus shipping for the physical copy. Shipping is about $10 for North America and $15 for Western Europe, I believe. Before we finally get to the song examples, let's talk about Luka's updated character design. Come on, you knew this was coming. When the silhouette of Luka V3 was first shown off at Anime Expo, people weren't quite sure what to make of the design. She seemed to have something strange on her head, and the outline suggested a long flowing gown which would have been quite different from the previous Krypton design updates. Some artists took to drawing predictions and ideas of what her finalized version might look like based on that outline. Actually, come to think of it, Krypton never released the artwork associated with that silhouette. Huh. In early November, another silhouette was displayed on Luka's product page, and Watt changed his Twitter avatar to this tiny preview of it, further enticing us. It wasn't until our V4X announcement that we finally got to see her new design in its full glory. And what can I say? It's taking all of my willpower to not howl like the wolf in one of those 40s cartoons.
I want a diamond ring, I want some bracelets and everything. Daddy, you better get the best for me.
I'm a fan of Ixama's art style, so Luka's update takes my breath away. The first time I saw it, that would have almost been a literal statement, as I was watching its reveal in a live stream where the video quality wasn't the greatest. For a second, I thought the cloth around her midsection was her bare skin. Thankfully, that is not the case, as Luka V4 is beautiful, elegant, and sophisticated. Yes, I still prefer Luka's original outfit. I've had 6 years to fawn over it, but I think Luka V4 is wonderful. Though Luka V4 isn't called an Append product, I do consider it an Append design. It's a large departure from her original outfit, but it still retains some elements, such as her asymmetric skirt, the gem on her collar, and the trumpet design on her bustier cover. In keeping with Krypton's Append designs being extra futuristic, considering the CV Vocaloids were already futuristic, she has bracelets on her wrists which can extend computer screens and touchpads. She also has this neat little heart brooch on her bust that has an X on it. Here you can see a cool fan-made real-life version. I believe this brooch is supposed to be her microphone, as it wraps under her arm and connects to the back of her collar. If there's anything I could change about the design, well, I'm not crazy about the sleeve things on her arms. They do add something extra to her, but I just think they look a little strange. I'm also divided on her headphones. That's some serious audiophile gear she's got equipped there. I would have preferred something a little more subtle, but overall, Luka V4 is gorgeous, and I am eagerly anticipating some figures for the design. Luka V4X is not the Luka update we were expecting. That much is clear. I would have preferred if she sounded more like her V2 voice banks, and I think most of us would have preferred if Krypton delayed her a few more months to give the developers time to iron out her kinks, improve her ease of use, and make more demos. Krypton used Luka to experiment with AtH, and it seems it is committed to the system as Miku V4 and Kagamine V4 will also feature AtH. From what I heard last, Miku V4's AtH system will not offer as many voice colors as Luka V4 does. It may only have 3 or 4. How many Rin and Len might receive is unknown. Watt's current Twitter avatar is a new picture of Miku, so I believe her V4 update has the priority at the moment. Despite its early rumblings, I believe AtH is a system that will pay off for Krypton, especially if it can make it more user-friendly. It gives the company something unique within the franchise, and it has the potential to give us more human-sounding Vocaloids. Luka V4X is not perfect. Oh, it still hurts to say that. But she still has a beautiful voice, and little more than 4 months after her release she already has over 600 songs on her Nico Nico tag, which is more than many Vocaloids receive in their first year. She is also selling very well in Japan and around the world. Yes, you can say that is due to the popularity of her character, and that's true. But Luka V4X is a great Vocaloid. Flawed and a little difficult, but brimming with potential. People are experimenting with her in every way imaginable, and I think these songs will prove to you how great she can be.
悲しみの雨は止むことなく降り続くすべての色が消えたこの街で我がガラスに映る姿が気づいただけであてもなくさまよい歩き続けこのままを乗れこの手にダメにも乗れくがいるがくがどうやってもなってそんな景色が「消えなき感情ささや しから遠くで光る星の悲しみまでもし君と会えたキャミは歌われると何度も逃げた先に笑う愚かで今の私では何もかも捨てて全て捧げて it's resonating. You've broken all of me, my heart and injury, that you don't care to mend and still I'm waiting. I should have been the one to say that it's goodbye, and you know why. When I call to say hello to know that you're alright, where were you last night? Even if you break the heart a million times, all remains the same. I wish I could tell myself somewhere inside I was the one to blame. If I could force you into find someone to truly make you see you'll be the person you want is to love with me. Snatch from your home, your secret layer. I adore that and bridge is overrated, but how I feel completed. Walls and barricades disconnected to the outside lanes around the sea of Mercury. Shackled eternally, touching with a chain. Even till you strain, feeling of your pain. Make you bend but you define all mine. In your brain, shoot true, still remain pregnant. In your brain, force remain you're forever mine. This is love, this is life. I am the only one who treat you right. Asylum, you can't escape. I'm the project type, I'm your ricochet. I'm your ricochet. And we leave the light and sound, handing over the sweet daydream. Brand new story is starting in the now. Whoa, whoa. Blue skies seen through a daylight. My mind's ahead of moonlight. I love by the glaring light. The night and day, the light and play, the sound with smoke. The door was shut, tight in the now, but you shouted. Time is over, starting the time of victory. 忍びしない